The cold had teeth that morning, biting through the threadbare blanket that was all Owen Vance had left from his old life. And he woke in the dark hour before dawn to the sound of a voice so low and rhythmic, it might have been the wind if he had not recognized it as prayer. He lay perfectly still on the straw pallet in the corner of the small barn, his breath shallow, listening to the guttural syllables of the orc language coming from somewhere beyond the wooden wall that separated his makeshift quarters from the main structure. The words were incomprehensible to him, alien sounds that rose and fell with a cadence that suggested something sacred, something private, and he knew without seeing that it was Grisha speaking, the orc girl who had found him half dead in the snow 3 weeks ago and dragged him to this abandoned farmstead on the edge of the frontier. He had been running from the war, from the memories of blood and steel and the screams of men who died calling for mothers who would never answer. Owen had served his 5 years in the border campaigns, fighting orcs and bandits, and sometimes he could not tell the difference. And when his term ended, he had taken his discharge pay and started walking north into the wilderness where no one would know his name or ask him to kill again. But winter came early that year, and the mountain pass caught him unprepared, and he had collapsed in a snowbank convinced he would die there. Then she had appeared, a massive figure silhouetted against the gray sky, and his first thought was that death had taken the form of an orc to mock him. She had tusks that curved up from her lower jaw, small but unmistakable, and her skin was the deep green of pine needles, and her eyes were amber like a wolf's. She wore furs and carried a hunting bow nearly as tall as she was, and when she knelt beside him in the snow he tried to tell her to finish it quickly, but his lips would not move. Instead she had lifted him as easily as a child lifts a doll, thrown him over her shoulder, and carried him down the mountain to this place. Now he listened to her pray and felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. He did not speak her language, but he had learned enough in 3 weeks to recognize certain words. She said his name, Owen, the syllables strange in her mouth, and then she said other things that sounded like appeals or requests, and he understood with a shock that ran through him like lightning that she was praying for him, for his safety, for his health, perhaps for his soul. He had been taught that orcs were savages without gods, that they lived like beasts and killed for pleasure, that they deserved extermination, or at best enslavement. The chaplains in the army had said it was holy work to drive them from the borderlands, to cleanse the frontier of their taint. Owen had believed it once, or told himself he did, because it was easier to kill something you thought of as less than human. But Grisha had saved his life and nursed him through fever and fed him venison stew and hard bread, and asked nothing in return except that he rest and heal. She spoke little, and what she did say was in broken human tongue that suggested she had learned it from traders or perhaps prisoners. She avoided his eyes most of the time, as if she feared he would see something in hers that she did not want to reveal. She slept in the main barn while he took the smaller storage room, and she always left before he woke and returned after dark, hunting or gathering or doing whatever it was she did to survive out here in the wilderness alone. The prayer ended, and he heard her moving around, the soft sound of her gathering her things, and then the creak of the barn door and the whisper of snow as she stepped outside. Owen waited until he was certain she was gone, then pushed himself up from the pallet and wrapped the blanket around his shoulders. His legs still ached where the frostbite had nearly taken his toes, but he could walk now, and he had been growing stronger each day. He knew he should leave soon, head further north to one of the logging camps or trapping settlements where a man could disappear and start over. But something kept him here, some obligation he could not name, or perhaps it was guilt, or perhaps it was something else entirely. He limped out into the main barn and found the fire pit in the center still glowing with embers. Grisha had left a pot of porridge warming at the edge, thick with oats and dried berries, and beside it was a cup of pine needle tea that she brewed every morning because she said it would keep him from getting sick again. He sat on one of the log benches and ate slowly, thinking about the sound of her voice in prayer, wondering what gods the orcs worshipped, and why she would waste prayers on a human stranger who had probably killed members of her own kind. The barn was old but well-maintained, the roof patched with fresh thatch, the walls chinked with moss and mud to keep out the wind. There were stalls for animals but no animals in them, and the loft above still held hay from some previous harvest. Someone had lived here once, a human farmer probably, but they were long gone now, driven out by the war or by weather or simply by the loneliness of the frontier. Grisha had claimed it for herself, made it into a shelter, and now she shared it with him. He finished his meal and cleaned the bowl in the bucket of snow melt by the door, then wrapped himself in his coat and stepped outside. The world was gray and white, dawn still an hour away, and the snow fell in lazy spirals from a sky the color of slate. The forest pressed close on three sides, dark pines heavy with snow, and to the south the land opened into a frozen meadow that stretched away toward the distant mountains. He could see Grisha's tracks leading into the trees to the east, deep prints from her boots, and he followed them without thinking, curious and compelled. The forest was silent except for the crunch of his footsteps and the occasional crack of ice-laden branches. He moved slowly, his leg protesting, and after a few hundred paces he saw her. She was standing in a small clearing, facing east where the sky was beginning to lighten, and her head was bowed. She had removed her fur cloak and stood in a leather vest and wool shirt despite the cold, her arms bare, and he could see the muscle in her shoulders and the scars that crisscrossed her green skin like a map of old pain. Her black hair was tied back in a braid that fell to the middle of her back, and in the dim light she looked like something carved from stone, ancient and enduring. She was praying again, he realized, or perhaps finishing the prayer she had started in the barn. Her voice was louder here, unafraid, and the words seemed to echo in the stillness. He did not mean to interrupt, but his injured leg buckled and he caught himself against a tree, and the sound made her spin around with a speed that startled him. Her hand went to the long knife at her belt, and for a moment they stared at each other, her amber eyes wide and fierce, and he saw something in them that might have been fear or anger or shame. "I am sorry," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I did not mean to intrude." She relaxed slightly but did not release the knife. "You should not be walking. Your leg is not healed." "I heard you," he said, and then regretted it because her expression shuddered, became unreadable. "I heard you praying. In the barn." She turned away from him, her shoulders tense. "It is none of your concern. You were praying for me." She did not answer, and the silence stretched between them like a frozen river, fragile and dangerous to cross. Finally she said, "I pray for many things. The hunt, the weather, safe passage. It does not matter. It matters to me." She looked at him over her shoulder, her face hard. "Why? You are human. You do not care what an orc does or thinks or prays." The bitterness in her voice was like a slap, and he took a step toward her, then another, ignoring the pain in his leg. "You saved my life. You brought me to shelter and fed me and asked nothing in return. I do not know why, but I know I owe you more than I can repay." "You owe me nothing," she said, her voice flat. "I did what anyone should do. I found someone dying and I helped them. That is all." "Not anyone," he said quietly. "Most orcs would have left me to freeze or killed me outright. Most humans would do the same to an orc, but you did not." She turned to face him fully now, and her eyes were blazing with something he could not name. "Do you want me to say I am different, that I am not like other orcs? That I am one of the good ones?" She spat the words like venom. "I am orc. I have fought humans. I have killed humans. I was cast out of my clan because I refused to raid the settlements because I said there had been enough bloodshed, and my father called me weak and my brothers called me traitor. So I left and I came here, and I survive alone because I belong nowhere. Not with my people, and certainly not with yours." Owen felt the weight of her words settle over him like the snow, heavy and cold. He had not known, had not thought to ask, had simply assumed she was a solitary hunter or a wanderer by choice. The idea that she had been exiled, cast out for refusing to kill, made something in his chest ache in a way he did not understand. "I am sorry," he said, and meant it. "I did not know." She laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Why should you? You are human. You see an orc and you see a monster. That is what you were taught. That is what all of you are taught." "I was taught that," he admitted, and her eyes widened slightly as if she had not expected honesty. "I was a soldier. I fought in the border wars. I killed orcs because my commanders told me to, because I believed it was right, because I was afraid of what would happen if I did not. But I do not believe that anymore. I cannot. Not after what I have seen. Not after what you have done for me." She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, and then she turned away again. "You should go back to the barn. You will get cold." He wanted to say more, to ask her about her prayers, about her gods, about why she had chosen to save him when she had every reason to let him die. But he could see that she had closed herself off, drawn back behind walls he did not know how to breach, so he nodded and turned to leave. "Owen," she said, and he stopped. She did not look at him, but her voice was softer now, almost gentle. "I pray to the ancestors, to the spirits of those who came before. I ask them to watch over those who cannot watch over themselves. I have no clan to pray for me, so I pray for others instead. It is what we do, what my people have always done. You do not have to understand it, but you do not have to fear it either." He felt something shift inside him, some old certainty crumbling. "I do not fear it," he said quietly. "I think it is kind." She did not respond, but he thought he saw her shoulders relax slightly, and he took that as permission to leave. He walked back through the forest to the barn, each step an effort, and when he reached the warmth of the fire, he sat down and stared into the flames and thought about prayers and ancestors, and the weight of kindness offered across an unbridgeable divide. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost like normalcy, though Owen knew it was as fragile as spring ice. Grisha left before dawn each morning to hunt or check her trap lines, and he spent the days tending the fire, preparing meals, and slowly regaining his strength. He found an old axe in the barn and began splitting wood for the fire, even though his leg ached and his hands blistered. It felt good to be useful, to contribute something, and when Grisha returned each evening to find the woodpile stocked and the stew bubbling over the fire, she would nod in what he hoped was approval. They spoke little, and when they did it was practical talk about food or weather or the condition of the barn's roof. But sometimes in the evenings, after they had eaten, they would sit on opposite sides of the fire, and the silence between them felt less like distance and more like companionship. He caught himself watching her when he thought she would not notice, studying the way the firelight played across her green skin, the way her tusks showed when she ate, the surprising delicacy of her hands as she mended her clothing or sharpened her knives. She was beautiful, he realized one night, and the thought startled him so much he nearly dropped the cup of tea he was holding. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with human standards or expectations. Beautiful like the forest was beautiful, wild and strong and entirely herself. The realization made him feel like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, looking down into something vast and unknown, and he did not know whether to step forward or back away. One evening, perhaps 2 weeks after he had followed her into the forest, she returned from hunting with blood on her hands and a haunted look in her eyes. She moved past him without speaking, went to the bucket of water, and scrubbed her hands so hard he thought she might take the skin off. He watched from the fire, uncertain, and then rose and approached her carefully. "What happened?" he asked. She did not look at him. "Wolves, a pack. They attacked me on the trail. Are you hurt?" "No, I killed them." Her voice was flat, emotionless. 3 of them. They were hungry, desperate. They did not want to fight, but they had no choice. Owen understood then. She had killed out of necessity to survive, but it weighed on her all the same. It was the burden of anyone who had taken life and had the heart to regret it. "You did what you had to do," he said softly. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I am so tired of killing, even animals, even to survive. I came here to escape the bloodshed, and still it follows me. How do you bear it? How do you live with what you have done?" The question was like a knife between his ribs, precise and painful. He thought about the men he had killed, the orc warriors who had fallen to his sword, the faces he still saw sometimes when he closed his eyes. He thought about the nightmares that woke him shaking, and the way he had tried to drown the memories in drink, until he realized it only made them louder. "I do not bear it well," he admitted. "I ran. I left the army and I walked into the wilderness hoping to leave it all behind. But you cannot outrun the past. It is always with you. The best you can do is try to build something better in the present." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so human and vulnerable it made his heart ache. What if there is nothing better to build? What if this is all there is? Survival and loneliness and death. He reached out without thinking and placed his hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her skin through her shirt, the solid strength of her beneath his palm. She stiffened at the contact but did not pull away. "You saved my life," he said. "That is something better. That is something that matters." She looked up at him, and for the first time since he had met her, she did not hide what was in her eyes. He saw pain there, and loneliness, and a desperate hope that someone might understand, might see her as more than the sum of her tusks and her green skin, and the violence the world expected from her kind. "I did not save you to be thanked," she whispered. "I saved you because I could not do otherwise. Because if I left you there, if I let you die when I could have helped, then I would have become what they all say I am. A monster. And I cannot bear that." Owen felt something crack open inside him, some armor he had worn for so long he had forgotten it was there. He moved his hand from her shoulder to her cheek, and she leaned into the touch like someone starving for warmth. "You are not a monster," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are the kindest person I have ever known." Tears spilled down her cheeks then, and she made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. "You barely know me. I know enough." They stood there in the dimness of the barn, the fire crackling behind them, the snow falling softly outside, and something shifted between them. Some invisible line crossed. He wanted to kiss her, wanted it with an intensity that frightened him, but he did not move because he did not know if she would welcome it or recoil. So he simply held her face in his hand and let her cry, and when she finally pulled away she smiled at him, tentative and fragile, and he thought it was the most precious thing he had ever been given. After that night, things changed. Grisha still left to hunt each morning, but she returned earlier, and sometimes she would ask him to help her with tasks around the barn or the clearing. They worked together to reinforce the roof, to dig a root cellar for storing food, to set snares along the forest paths. She taught him words in her language, the names of trees and animals and the phrases for common things, and he taught her more human words, helping her smooth out the rough edges of her accent. They laughed together when he mispronounced something badly, and the sound of her laughter was like music, rare and startling and wonderful. He found himself looking for excuses to be near her, to brush against her when they passed in the barn, to sit close enough to feel her warmth. She seemed to do the same, and there was a tension between them now, electric and unspoken, a question neither of them knew how to ask. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Grisha said quietly, "Will you leave? When the spring comes and the pass is clear." The question caught him off guard, and he looked at her across the flames. Her face was carefully neutral, but he could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear of his answer. "I do not know," he said honestly. "I have nowhere to go, nothing to return to. But I cannot stay here forever, living off your charity." "It is not charity," she said, her voice sharp. "You work, you help, you earn your place." "Is that what this is?" he asked. "A partnership, an arrangement?" She looked away, and he saw the tension in her jaw. What else could it be? He should have let it drop, should have accepted the easy answer and maintained the careful distance they had been dancing around. But he was tired of distance, tired of pretending he did not feel what he felt. "It could be more," he said quietly. She went very still, and the silence stretched so long he thought she would not respond. Then she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Do not say that. Do not offer something you do not mean." "I mean it." She stood abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. "You do not know what you are saying. You are human, I am orc. There is no future in that, only pain." He stood as well, moving around the fire to face her. "There is pain in everything. That does not mean we should not try." She looked at him with something like anguish in her eyes. "They will hate you, your people. If they knew you cared for an orc, they would call you traitor, beast lover, worse. They would cast you out just as my people cast me out. You would lose everything." "I have already lost everything," he said. "I have no family, no home, no place in the world I came from. The only thing I have is here with you." She shook her head, backing away from him. "You do not understand. You have only been here a few weeks. The loneliness, the isolation, it is making you confused. When spring comes, you will remember who you are and what I am, and you will leave. And I will be alone again, but it will be worse because I will have allowed myself to hope." The raw honesty of her words hit him like a blow, and he saw the truth of what she feared. She had been abandoned before, rejected by her own people, and she was terrified of being rejected again. He wanted to promise her he would never leave, but he knew promises were cheap and easily broken. So instead, he closed the distance between them and took her hands in his. "I cannot promise you the future," he said. "I do not know what will happen when spring comes, or where we will go, or how we will live. But I can promise you this moment. Right now. I can tell you that I care for you, that I want to stay, that when I think about leaving it feels like tearing my own heart out. And maybe that is not enough. Maybe I am asking too much, but I needed you to know." She stared at him, her amber eyes searching his face, and he could see her warring with herself, fear and hope and longing all tangled together. Then slowly, she lifted one hand and placed it on his chest over his heart, and he felt the warmth of her palm through his shirt. "I am afraid," she whispered. "So am I," he said. She leaned forward then, resting her forehead against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arms around her and held her close. She was tall enough that he barely had to look up, and she was strong enough to break him in half if she wanted. But in that moment, she felt fragile, like something precious and easily shattered. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the firelight, and it felt like something breaking and something beginning all at once. That night, Grisha did not go to her usual sleeping place in the loft. Instead, She spread her bedroll near his in the corner, close enough that he could reach out and touch her if he wanted. They lay in the darkness, not speaking, and he listened to her breathing and felt the warmth of her presence, and thought that he had never been less alone in his entire life. The winter deepened, and the world outside became a study in white and gray and the dark green of the pines. They were snowed in for days at a time, the drifts piling up against the barn walls, the sky heavy and close. Owen had worried that being trapped in such close quarters would strain things between them, but instead it brought them closer. They told each other stories to pass the time, his tales of growing up in a farming village and joining the army, hers of life in the Orc clan and the traditions she had been raised with. He learned that Orcs valued honor and strength, but also community and loyalty to one's kin. He learned that they told stories of great heroes and tragic lovers, that they had poets and singers and craftspeople, just like humans did. He learned that Grisha had wanted to be a healer, that she had studied with the clan's medicine woman before the elders decided she should be a warrior instead. She spoke of it with regret, a path not taken, and he wished he could give her the chance to follow it now. She learned about his family, his mother who had died when he was young, his father who had drunk himself to death, his sister who had married a merchant and moved to the coast. He had not seen his sister in 6 years, and he did not know if she was still alive. Grisha listened with a sadness in her eyes that told him she understood loss, understood the way family could be both a blessing and a wound that never quite healed. They grew comfortable with each other's touch, small gestures of affection that would have been unremarkable between two humans, but felt significant and precious between them. He would brush snow from her hair when she came in from outside, and she would check his healing leg with gentle hands, massaging the muscles to keep them from stiffening. They sat close by the fire, shoulders touching, and sometimes she would rest her head on his shoulder and he would feel like he held the whole world in that small point of contact. But they did not kiss, and they did not speak again of what was growing between them. It was as if they had both agreed silently that naming it would make it too real, too dangerous, and so they existed in a space between friendship and something more, testing the boundaries, learning each other. Then one morning Owen woke to find Grisha standing at the barn door, staring out at something he could not see. Her posture was rigid, alert, and when he approached she held up a hand to silence him. "What is it?" he whispered. "Smoke," she said. "To the south." And I heard voices in the night, human voices traveling through the forest. Fear shot through him, cold and sharp. How many? I do not know, more than 2. They are camped somewhere close, perhaps a mile away. Owen's mind raced. Humans this far into the wilderness in the dead of winter could only be hunters, trappers, or soldiers. And if they were soldiers, if they were from the border campaigns, they would see Grisha as an enemy to be killed on sight. "We should leave," he said. "Go deeper into the forest where they will not find us." She shook her head. "In this snow, with your leg still healing, we would not last 3 days, and they may not find us here. This barn is well hidden. If we are careful, if we do not draw attention, they may pass by without noticing." It was a risk, but she was right. Running in the winter could be as deadly as staying. So they spent the day in tense silence, keeping the fire low, moving as quietly as possible, listening for any sound that might indicate the humans were coming closer. Grisha kept her bow strung and her knives sharp, and Owen found himself wishing he had a weapon beyond the small belt knife she had given him. Night fell, and they heard the voices again, louder now, closer. Owen stood at a crack in the barn wall and peered out into the darkness, and he could see the distant glow of a campfire through the trees. There were at least 6 figures around it, maybe more, and they had the bearing of soldiers, disciplined and organized. They are hunting, Grisha said quietly from behind him. Looking for something. Or someone, Owen said, and felt her hand on his shoulder, tense and worried. They did not sleep that night, sitting by the banked fire with weapons ready, every sound outside making them start. But the dawn came and the voices moved further away, and by midday the smoke from the distant camp had disappeared. It seemed they had passed by, continuing their search elsewhere. But the encounter left them both shaken, a reminder that their fragile sanctuary was not as safe as they had allowed themselves to believe. That evening, as they ate a somber meal of dried meat and roots, Grisha said, "You should go to them. Tell them you were lost, that you survived the winter alone. They would take you in, help you reach a settlement." Owen set down his bowl and looked at her. "And what would happen to you?" She did not answer, but he saw the truth in her eyes. If he left with the soldiers, if he led them away, she would be safe. But he would be gone and she would be alone again. "I am not leaving," he said firmly. "We will find another way." "There is no other way," she said, her voice breaking. "This is how it must be. You are human. You belong with your people. I was foolish to think we could." She stopped, swallowed hard. "You should go while you have the chance." He moved around the fire and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Listen to me. I do not care what I am supposed to do or where I am supposed to belong. I care about you, I choose you, and I am not leaving unless you tell me you want me gone." She looked at him with tears streaming down her face, and he reached up and wiped them away with his thumbs, marveling at the softness of her skin, the warmth of her. "I do not want you gone," she whispered. "I want you to stay. I want you to stay so much it terrifies me." "Then I stay," he said simply. She pulled him close then, wrapping her arms around him, and he held her and felt her shake with silent sobs. They stayed like that until the fire burned low and the cold crept in, and then they lay down together on the shared bedrolls, and he held her through the night, her back pressed against his chest, his arm around her waist, and he thought that this was what home felt like. The soldiers did not return, but their presence had changed something, had made the outside world feel closer and more threatening. Grisha grew more cautious, checking her trap lines with care, varying her routes so she would not leave an obvious trail. Owen insisted on accompanying her when she went out, despite the cold and his still healing leg, because he could not bear the thought of her facing danger alone. They were checking a snare line one morning, perhaps a week after the soldiers had passed, when they heard the sound. It was a cry, high and desperate, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. Grisha froze, her head cocked, listening, and then she swore in her own language and took off running. Owen followed as best he could, crashing through the snow, his legs screaming in protest. He found her in a small ravine, kneeling beside a figure half buried in the snow. It was a child, a human girl no more than 8 or 9, dressed in inadequate clothing and shaking violently with cold. Her lips were blue and her eyes were unfocused, and Owen recognized the signs of severe hypothermia. "We have to get her warm," he said, already shrugging out of his coat to wrap around the girl. Grisha scooped the child up as gently as if she were made of glass. "The barn! Quickly!" They ran through the forest, Grisha carrying the girl, Owen stumbling behind, and when they reached the barn, Grisha laid the child beside the fire and began rubbing her limbs to restore circulation. Owen piled on blankets and heated water and made tea with honey, and together they worked to bring the girl back from the edge of death. It took hours, but finally her shaking stopped and her breathing steadied and she opened her eyes. They were wide and frightened, and when she saw Grisha leaning over her she screamed and tried to scramble away. "It is all right," Owen said quickly, kneeling beside her. "You are safe. She helped you. We both did." The girl stared at him with wild eyes. "She is an orc. She will eat me." She will not, Owen said firmly. She saved your life. Her name is Grisha, and she is my friend. What is your name? The girl looked between them, confused and terrified, but finally she whispered, Lily. Lily, Owen repeated gently. How did you come to be out here alone? Tears welled in the girl's eyes. We were traveling to the northern settlement, my parents and me and my little brother. But there was a storm and an avalanche, and the wagon went over the edge. I do not know what happened to them. I tried to find help, but I got lost. Owen's heart sank. An avalanche on the mountain pass. There would be no survivors, not in this weather. This child was alone in the world now, just as he and Grisha were. He looked at Grisha, and she looked back at him, and he saw his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. They could not turn this child out into the wilderness, but they also could not bring her to a settlement, not without risking exposure, not without answering questions about how she had survived and who had helped her. You will stay with us, Grisha said, her voice gentle, until you are strong enough. Then we will decide what to do. Lily looked at her, still afraid but also desperate, and finally she nodded. The girl was a complication they had not planned for, but she was also a responsibility neither of them could ignore. Over the following days, Lily slowly warmed to them, though she remained wary of Grisha, flinching whenever the orc woman moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. Owen served as intermediary, explaining that Grisha meant no harm, showing by example that it was safe to trust her. Grisha, for her part, was endlessly patient with the child, speaking softly, moving carefully, offering small kindnesses like extra portions of food or a carved wooden toy she made from a scrap of pine. Owen watched the way she interacted with Lily and saw another side of her, a nurturing gentleness that she had never shown him because he was a grown man and did not need it. But with this child, this orphaned human girl, Grisha was tender in a way that made his chest ache. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep by the fire, Owen said quietly, "You would have been a good healer, a good mother." Grisha looked at him, startled. "Do not say such things." "Why not? It is true," she shook her head. "I will never be a mother. Orc women who are cast out do not have children. We do not have mates or families. We are alone." "You are not alone," he said, reaching for her hand. "You have me." She looked down at their joined hands, his pale skin against her green, and her expression was so sad it hurt to see. "For now. But what happens when spring comes and we have to take Lily to a settlement? They will ask questions. They will see me. They will know." "Then we do not take her to a settlement," Owen said. "We find another way. We raise her ourselves if we have to." Grisha stared at him as if he had lost his mind. "You cannot be serious." "Why not? We are already caring for her. What difference does it make if it is for a few weeks or a few years? The difference is that she is human and needs human society, human education. She needs safety and love," Owen interrupted. "She needs people who will care for her and protect her. We can give her that." Grisha pulled her hand away, her expression troubled. "You do not know what you are asking. To raise a child in the wilderness with no others of her kind, with an orc as one of her guardians. She would grow up isolated, strange. She would never fit in anywhere." "And what is the alternative?" Owen asked. "We take her to a settlement and tell them she survived alone for weeks in the winter. They will not believe it. They will ask how she really survived, and eventually the truth will come out. And when it does, they will hunt you. They will kill you for the crime of saving a human child's life." The words hung between them, brutal and true. Grisha looked away, and he saw the fear in her eyes, the knowledge that he was right. "There is no good choice," she said finally. "Only bad ones and worse ones." "Then we choose the bad one that lets us stay together," Owen said. "We keep her. We raise her. We teach her that the world is not as simple as humans and orcs, good and evil. We give her a chance to be better than what we were." Grisha was silent for a long time, staring into the fire, and he did not press her. Finally she said, "If we do this, if we keep her, there is no going back. We will be committing ourselves to a life in hiding, away from both our peoples. You will never be able to return to human society. Is that truly what you want?" Owen thought about his old life, the war and the violence and the crushing weight of being a man in a world that demanded he be hard and cold and unfeeling. He thought about the loneliness that had driven him into the wilderness, the desperate hope that he might find something better. And he looked at Grisha, at this fierce, kind, broken woman who had saved him in every way a person could be saved, and he knew his answer. "Yes," he said, "that is what I want." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression, some final wall coming down. "Then we keep her," she said quietly. "And may the ancestors forgive us if we are making a mistake." Lily grew stronger over the following weeks, her natural resilience and the steady care they provided bringing color back to her cheeks and energy to her steps. She began to help with small tasks, fetching water or stirring the porridge, and she chattered endlessly about anything and everything, filling the barn with a sound it had not held before, the sound of childhood. She was still afraid of Grisha, but the fear was fading, replaced by a cautious curiosity. She asked Owen questions in whispers when Grisha was out hunting, wanting to know about orcs, about why Grisha was different from the monsters in the stories, about whether it was true that orcs ate children. Owen answered each question patiently, explaining that orcs were people just like humans, with good and bad among them, and that Grisha was one of the very best people he had ever known. One day, Lily approached Grisha directly for the first time, holding out a small wildflower she had found growing improbably in a patch of sunlight near the barn. "This is for you," she said shyly, "to say thank you for saving me." Grisha took the flower with a hand that trembled slightly, and she looked at it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you, little one," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I will keep it safe." After that, Lily's fear melted away entirely, and she began to follow Grisha around like a shadow, asking questions about hunting and tracking and what it was like to be an orc. Grisha answered with surprising patience, teaching the girl skills that would help her survive, and Owen watched them together and felt something warm and bright unfurl in his chest. This was a family, he realized. Strange and unconventional and cobbled together from broken pieces, but a family nonetheless. As winter began to loosen its grip, and the first hints of spring appeared in the lengthening days and the occasional melt, Owen and Grisha began to plan. They could not stay at the barn indefinitely. It was too close to the main trails, too likely to be discovered once the weather improved and more travelers ventured into the wilderness. They needed to go deeper, find a more remote location where they could build a true home. Grisha knew of a valley further north, a place she had scouted during her wanderings, where game was plentiful and there was a natural spring that never froze. It would be a hard journey, especially with Lily, but it was their best chance at long-term survival. They began to prepare, gathering supplies, drying meat, repairing their clothing and gear. One evening, as they sat together planning the route, Lily asked innocently, "Are you two married?" Owen choked on his tea and Grisha went very still. They had been so careful to avoid defining what they were to each other, to keep things in the safe space of unspoken affection, and now this child had asked the question neither of them had dared to voice. "No," Grisha said finally, "we are not married." "Why not?" Lily asked. "You live together. You take care of each other. That is what married people do." "It is more complicated than that," Owen said, trying to find words that would make sense to a child. Grisha is orc and I am human. Our peoples do not usually marry each other. Lily frowned. That is silly. If you love each other, you should be married. The word hung in the air between them, bright and dangerous and impossible to ignore. Love. Owen looked at Grisha and she looked back at him, and he saw in her eyes the same truth he felt in his own heart. He did love her. He had been avoiding the word, afraid of the weight of it, afraid of what it would mean to admit it. But it was there, undeniable, and had been for weeks. Lily, Grisha said gently, go to sleep now. It is late. The girl grumbled but obeyed, curling up in her blankets by the fire. Owen and Grisha sat in silence until they were certain she was asleep, and then Owen said quietly, "She is not wrong." Grisha closed her eyes. "Owen, please." "I love you," he said, the words spilling out now that the dam had broken. "I have been trying not to say it, trying not to make things more difficult than they already are, but it is true. I love you, and I think you love me too." She opened her eyes and they were wet with tears. "Of course I love you. How could I not? You are kind and brave, and you see me as more than my tusks and my green skin. You make me feel like I am not alone in the world. But love is not enough. Love does not change what we are or the world we live in." "Then we change the world," he said fiercely. "Or at least our corner of it. We go to that valley and we build a home and we live the way we want to live. And maybe it will not be easy and maybe we will always have to hide, but we will be together. And that is enough for me. Is it enough for you?" She stared at him for a long moment, and then she reached out and cupped his face in her hands, her palms rough and warm. "Yes," she whispered, "it is enough." He leaned forward and kissed her, finally, after weeks of wanting and waiting. And her lips were soft and her tusks pressed against his cheek, and it was strange and perfect, and everything he had not known he needed. She kissed him back with a fierceness that spoke of hunger and hope, and the terrifying courage of allowing oneself to be vulnerable. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, and Grisha rested her forehead against his and said, "What have we done?" "Something reckless and wonderful," he said, and she laughed, the sound bright and beautiful in the dim barn. They left for the valley a week later, when the trails were just passable and the worst of the winter had released its grip. The journey took 5 days of hard travel through melting snow and mud, with Lily sometimes walking and sometimes riding on Grisha's shoulders, chattering the whole way. They saw no other people, only the waking forest and the wildlife emerging from hibernation, and Owen allowed himself to hope that they might truly find peace in this remote place. The valley was everything Grisha had promised. It was sheltered by steep hills on 3 sides, with a stream running through the center and a stand of old-growth forest providing timber and shelter. The spring she had mentioned bubbled up from the earth in a small grotto, the water clear and cold and sweet. It was beautiful and isolated and perfect. They set to work immediately, building a cabin from logs and stones, laying in a garden plot for planting, constructing a smokehouse and a root cellar. It was back-breaking work, and there were days when Owen wondered if they would manage it, if they had been foolish to think they could carve out a life in such a harsh place. But Grisha was tireless, and Lily helped with surprising enthusiasm. And slowly, day by day, the cabin took shape. They worked through spring and into summer, and as the world warmed and greened around them, Owen felt something ease in his chest, some tension he had carried for years unwinding. He had not realized how heavy it was to live in fear, to always be bracing for the next battle, the next loss. Here, in this hidden valley with these 2 people who had become his entire world, he could finally breathe. One evening in midsummer, after Lily had gone to sleep in the loft of the now completed cabin, Owen and Grisha sat outside under the stars. The night was warm and clear. The the sky a tapestry of brilliant points of light, and Grisha pointed out the constellations her people knew, telling him the stories that went with them. He listened to her voice, low and melodic, and felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. "I need to tell you something," Grisha said suddenly, and her tone made him turn to look at her. She was staring up at the stars, her expression serious. "In my culture, there is a tradition. When two people decide to commit their lives to each other, they speak vows to the ancestors, asking for their blessing and their protection. It is not the same as human marriage, but it is similar. It is a promise." Owen's heart began to beat faster. "Are you asking me? I am asking if you would speak vows with me," she said, still not looking at him. "If you would make that promise, not for Lily's sake, though she would be happy, not because it changes anything practical about our lives, but because I want to say the words. I want to claim you as mine and be claimed as yours, if that is something you want as well." He reached out and took her hand, and she finally looked at him, and her eyes were full of a vulnerability that made him ache. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes, I want that, more than anything." She smiled then, a real smile that showed her tusks and made her whole face light up, and she pulled him close and kissed him until they were both dizzy. When they finally broke apart, she said, "Then we will do it tomorrow, at dawn. I will teach you the words." They spoke their vows the next morning as the sun rose over the valley, the two of them standing by the spring with Lily as their witness. Grisha taught him the phrases in her language, words that spoke of loyalty and protection and love that endured beyond death, and he repeated them carefully, trying to honor the weight of what they meant. She spoke her own vows in return, her voice strong and clear, and then she took his hands and said in human tongue, "You are my mate, Owen Vance, my heart and my home. I will stand with you in all things, in joy and in sorrow, until the end of my days." "And you are mine," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Grisha, my mate, my love, I will cherish you and protect you and choose you every day for as long as I live." Lily, who had been watching with wide eyes, clapped her hands and said, "Does this mean you are married now?" "Yes," Grisha said, pulling the girl into a hug. "I suppose it does." They celebrated with a feast that evening, roasting a deer Grisha had hunted and baking bread from the first wheat flour they had managed to trade for at a distant settlement. They ate until they were full, and Lily sang songs her mother had taught her, and Grisha told stories of orc heroes, and Owen felt a happiness so complete he was almost afraid of it, as if acknowledging it would cause it to shatter. But it did not shatter. The days turned to weeks, and the weeks to months, and they fell into the rhythm of their new life. Lily grew taller and stronger, losing the last traces of the frightened child they had found in the snow. She learned to hunt and fish and track, skills Grisha taught her with infinite patience, and she learned to read and write from the old books Owen had carried in his pack from his army days. She was bright and curious and fierce, and Owen loved her as if she were his own daughter, as did Grisha. The valley provided for them, the garden yielding vegetables and the forest offering game and the stream full of fish. They made occasional trips to a distant trading post, carefully timed so that only Owen would be seen, and they traded furs and smoked meat for flour and salt and other necessities. It was a simple life, but it was theirs, and Owen thought that he had never been happier. There were challenges, of course. The first winter in the valley was hard, testing the limits of their supplies and their shelter. Grisha fell ill with a fever in late autumn, and Owen nursed her through it with a terror he had not felt since the war, afraid that he would lose her. But she recovered, and when she was well again she held him and thanked him and told him she had heard him praying over her, speaking words to the ancestors in her language, and it had given her the strength to fight. Lily had nightmares sometimes, waking in the night crying for parents who would never return, and Owen or Grisha would hold her and comfort her until she fell back asleep. She asked questions sometimes about why they lived apart from others, why they had to hide, and they answered as honestly as they could, explaining that the world was not always kind to those who were different, but that here in the valley they were safe and loved, and that was what mattered most. There were moments of fear, too, when they saw smoke from distant fires and worried that someone was drawing near, or when Grisha found tracks in the forest that suggested other orcs had passed through, though they never came close to the valley. Each time, they reinforced their defenses, set more traps, and reminded each other that they would face whatever came together. But mostly there was joy. There were summer evenings spent swimming in the stream, Lily's laughter echoing off the hills as Grisha splashed her, and Owen tried to catch fish with his bare hands. There were autumn days spent harvesting apples from the wild trees they had found and making preserves for the winter. There were winter nights spent around the fire, telling stories and carving wood and simply being together. And there were spring mornings when Owen would wake to find Grisha already up, standing at the window of their cabin watching the sun rise, and he would come up behind her and wrap his arms around her waist and feel her lean back into him, solid and warm and home. 3 years passed this way, and then 4, and then 5. Lily grew from a child into a young woman, tall and capable and fierce. She had Grisha's confidence and Owen's kindness, and she moved between human and orc ways with an ease that neither of her guardians could quite manage. She spoke both languages fluently, knew the stories and traditions of both peoples, and seemed to see no contradiction in honoring both. One evening, when Lily was 15, she came to Owen and Grisha with a question. They were sitting outside the cabin as they often did, watching the stars emerge, and she sat down between them and said, "I want to go to the trading post. Not with you, Papa Owen, but by myself. I want to see what it is like to be around other people." Owen felt his stomach clench with fear. They had kept Lily so carefully sheltered, so protected from the prejudices and dangers of the outside world, and the thought of her venturing out alone terrified him. But Grisha said calmly, "Why do you want to go?" Lily was quiet for a moment, then said, "Because I need to know if I can. I need to know if I can exist in that world, if I can talk to other humans without them knowing I was raised by an orc. I need to know if the things you have taught me will be enough." "And what if they see through you?" Owen asked. "What if they ask questions you cannot answer?" "Then I will lie," Lily said simply, "or I will leave. But I need to try. I cannot hide here forever. I need to know what kind of person I am when I am not here, when I am not with you." Owen looked at Grisha, and she looked back at him, and he saw his own fear reflected in her eyes. But he also saw pride and a deep sadness, because they both knew this was coming. Lily was growing up, and she needed to find her place in the world, even if that place was not here in the valley with them. "You can go," Grisha said finally. "But you take weapons, and you go in daylight, and you come back before dark. And if anyone threatens you, if anyone makes you feel unsafe, you run. Do you understand?" Lily nodded, her eyes bright with excitement and trepidation. "I understand." She went to the trading post 2 days later, riding the horse they had managed to acquire and trade for over the years, and Owen and Grisha waited in an agony of worry. But she returned safely that evening, her face flushed and her eyes sparkling, and she told them about the people she had met, the goods she had seen, the conversations she had overheard. She had passed as a normal human girl, a trapper's daughter from further north, and no one had questioned her story. After that, she went to the trading post once a month, and then twice a month, and Owen and Grisha had to accept that their carefully constructed sanctuary was no longer enough for her. She was curious about the world, eager to explore, and they could not keep her here forever, no matter how much they might want to. The issue came to a head one evening in late summer, when Lily was 16. She came to them with a seriousness in her expression that made Owen's heart sink. "There is a man at the trading post," she said. "His name is Thomas. He is a carpenter's apprentice. He has been kind to me and we have talked several times. He has asked if he can court me." Owen felt as if he had been punched in the gut. He had known this would happen eventually, that Lily would grow up and meet someone and want to leave, but knowing it and facing it were two different things. "What did you tell him?" Grisha asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I said I needed to speak with my family first," Lily said. "I did not say yes, but I did not say no. Because I do not know what I want, I like him. He is smart and kind and he makes me laugh. But if I pursue this, if I allow him to court me, it means I will have to leave the valley. I will have to live in the human world and pretend to be someone I am not. And I do not know if I can do that. I do not know if I want to." She looked at them with tears in her eyes. "I do not want to leave you. You are my family. You saved me and raised me and loved me, but I also do not want to spend my whole life hiding. I want to see the world, to meet people, to have choices. And I feel like I am being torn in two because I cannot have both." Grisha reached out and took Lily's hand. "You are not being torn in two. You are simply growing up, becoming your own person. And that means making choices that are difficult, that require sacrifice. Your papa, Owen, and I, we chose to leave our worlds behind to be together. We chose isolation and hiding because the alternative was losing each other. But you do not have to make that choice. You can go out into the world and build a life there, a life with people and community and love. And it does not mean you are leaving us behind. It means you are honoring what we gave you, the chance to be more than we could be." "But what about you?" Lily asked, her voice breaking. "What about Papa, Owen, and you? You will be alone again." Owen felt his own eyes burn with tears, but he forced himself to smile. "We will have each other," he said. "And we will have the knowledge that we raised a brave, kind, extraordinary young woman who has her whole life ahead of her. That is more than enough." Lily cried then, and they held her, and Owen thought that this was the hardest thing he had ever done, letting her go, but he knew it was the right thing. She deserved the chance to live fully, to not be constrained by the choices they had made. Over the following months, Lily began spending more time at the trading post, and eventually she told Owen and Grisha that she had accepted Thomas's courtship, and that she wanted to move to the settlement where he lived. It was a small logging town, 3 days' ride from the valley, and she would work as a seamstress and he as a carpenter, and they would build a life together. The day she left was one of the hardest of Owen's life. They packed her things, gave her the horse and supplies for the journey, and stood outside the cabin watching her prepare to ride away. She hugged them both, holding on as if she could not let go, and Grisha whispered something to her in the Orc language, a blessing from the ancestors, and Lily repeated it back through her tears. "I will visit," she promised, "as often as I can. And if you ever need me, if you ever need anything, you send word and I will come, I promise." "We know," Owen said, his voice thick. "Now go and be happy." She rode away, and they stood watching until she disappeared into the trees. And then Grisha turned to Owen and buried her face in his chest, and cried in a way he had never seen her cry before. Deep sobs that shook her whole body. He held her and cried too, and they stood there in the yard of their cabin, clinging to each other, mourning the loss of the girl who had been their daughter in all but blood. But life went on, as it always does. Lily did visit, twice a year, and each time she came she was a little more grown, a little more confident, a little more at home in the human world. She married Thomas in a small ceremony at the settlement, and Owen and Grisha could not attend, but they sent gifts: a carved wooden chest from Owen and a woven blanket from Grisha. And Lily sent back a letter saying it was the most beautiful wedding she could have imagined, and she wished they could have been there. She had children, 2 daughters and a son, and she brought them to the valley when they were small and introduced them to their grandparents. And Owen and Grisha marveled at these small humans who had their daughter's eyes and their son-in-law's smile. The children were not afraid of Grisha, because Lily had taught them that orcs were people just like anyone else, and they called her grandmother Grisha and climbed on her lap and begged for stories. Those visits were bittersweet, filled with joy and the ache of knowing they would be brief. But they were also a reminder that what Owen and Grisha had built together had not ended with Lily's leaving. It had expanded, grown into something larger than themselves, a legacy of love that crossed the boundaries of species and prejudice. The years continued to pass. Owen's hair turned gray and then white, and his joints ached in the cold, and he moved more slowly than he once had. Grisha aged too, though more slowly, as was the way of orc kind, and she cared for him with a tenderness that never wavered. She brewed him teas for his pain, made sure he did not overwork himself, sat with him by the fire in the evenings and held his hand, and told him stories of the ancestors and the heroes of old. One evening, when Owen was in his 60s and Grisha still looked barely middle-aged, he said to her, "I am sorry I cannot give you more time. Orcs live longer than humans. You will be alone when I am gone." She looked at him with fierce eyes. "Do not speak of that, we have time yet." "Not as much as we would like," he said gently. "I need to know that you will be all right, that you will not hide away in this valley forever after I am gone." "Where else would I go?" she asked, her voice breaking. "This is our home. You are my home." "Then make a new home," he said. "Go to Lily. Let her care for you. Let her children know you. Do not be alone, Grisha. Promise me." She wept then, and he held her as she had held him so many times, and she promised, though he was not sure she would keep that promise when the time came. But the time did not come for several more years. Owen lived to see his grandchildren grow, to hold his first great-grandchild in his arms, a tiny girl with Lily's fierce eyes. He lived to see the valley change with the seasons 24 more times, to watch the stars wheel overhead and the world turn, and he was grateful for every moment, every breath, every heartbeat spent with the woman he loved. When the end finally came, it was gentle. He fell asleep one evening by the fire, Grisha beside him, and he simply did not wake up. She held him through the night, whispering prayers to the ancestors in her language, asking them to guide him safely to whatever came after. And in the morning, she carried him to the hill overlooking the valley and buried him there, beneath a great oak tree, in the earth of the home they had built together. She carved a marker from stone, using the skills he had taught her, and on it she wrote in both human and orc script, "Owen Vance, beloved mate, cherished father, good man." And beneath that, in her own language, a phrase that translated roughly to, "He saw me and loved me and made me whole." Grisha stayed in the valley for a time, unable to leave, tending his grave and speaking to him as if he could hear. But eventually, remembering her promise, she packed her things and made the long journey to the settlement where Lily lived. She arrived unannounced, and when Lily opened the door and saw her standing there, older and grief-worn but still strong, Lily pulled her inside and held her and wept. "I am sorry," Grisha said. "I am sorry I did not come sooner. I did not know how." "You are here now," Lily said fiercely. "That is what matters. You are here and you are home." And so Grisha stayed, living in a small cottage behind Lily's house, helping to raise the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, teaching them the skills she had once taught their mother. The people of the settlement were wary at first, frightened of the orc woman in their midst, but Lily defended her fiercely. And over time they came to accept her, even respect her, because she was kind and wise and her hands could heal as well as fight. She told stories of Owen to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive, and she taught the children the orc prayers she had once said over him in the dawn hours when she thought he could not hear. She lived for many more years, long enough to see the youngest of her great-great-grandchildren born, and when she finally passed, surrounded by family, they buried her beside Owen in the valley, beneath the oak tree, so that they could be together even in death. On her stone marker, Lily carved the words, "Grisha, beloved mate, cherished mother, fierce heart." And beneath that, in human script so all could read, "She loved and was loved and changed the world." And in the valley, where the stream still runs clear and the spring still bubbles up from the earth, where the cabin they built still stands weathered but strong, their story became legend. It was told around fires on cold nights, passed from parent to child, a tale of love that crossed boundaries, of courage in the face of hatred, of two people who chose each other when the world said they could not. And though the names sometimes changed and the details blurred with time, the heart of the story remained true. That love, real love, sees no difference in the color of skin or the shape of tusks or the prejudices of the world, but only the soul of the beloved, and that is enough to build a life on, a family on, a legacy that endures long after the lovers themselves have returned to the earth.